Welcome. In this demonstration, we will see how we can draw a path that is leading across planes. So, essentially so far in our demonstrations, I've drawn something like this, where there's a path that is leading further out. But this is, again, it's a flat plane. So we have seen, how we can draw a path leading out in the distance in a flat plane. Or we have also seen, in another demonstration, how you can actually draw a path that is along a plane, right? So this is the plane, and then we have a path that is going further down the plane. What we will do in this demonstration is something different. We will see how we can actually have a path that goes across multiple planes, and that really adds a big element of interest in the drawing because, like I've described before, a viewer essentially, follows your drawing. So they follow the different elements in the distance, and if you have a path that goes across different planes, that really adds a nice element of visual interest in your drawing. So that's what we will see how we can draw in this demonstration. So we always start, I've explained before, when you're drawing different planes, you always start by drawing the plane that is closest to you, right? So that is closest to the viewer. So let's put down that plane. So this is the plane that is closest to the viewer in our drawing. And what we do next is to draw other planes that are kind of behind this closest plane. So I will draw another plane over here, something like this. And we always draw these planes in dotted line because we'll have other element that will go across these planes. So what we want to do is to first draw those elements, and once we have done that, then we can draw these the line of these planes solid. And what I will do next is to then finally draw another plane in the distance like this. So essentially, I start with my closest plane, then I draw the plane that is next to it by and again, since because this line stops here, this establishes the order of planes. So this is closest to the viewer, and this line is hidden, stops here. So this plane is behind this plane. So that's how we establish the order, and that's what I've done over here. So I've drawn another plane that is behind our closest plane, and then we have this plane which is furthest out right here. And then I will draw one more plane just to make it interesting, something like this actually. So this plane is the furthest out. It is hidden behind this plane and behind this plane. So this is how we have seen how we can easily establish the order of planes and create a nice pleasing kind of outline of our landscape. So always try to create these different planes, because as you can see, even before we do anything, these kind of receding planes, they add a nice element of visual interest in your composition. And what we will now do is essentially draw a path that goes across multiple planes. So we will start by laying down this path. So let me start again using dotted line. And again, a path will always decrease in size. So that's what we have done. So I have this path that is reducing in size. And what we will do is to now continue this path across this plane over here, like something like this. And then finally, we can even have a very small element of this path in this last plane over there. So this is how you actually, once you lay down your plane, you can again lay down the path in a similar manner. Just remember to kind of reduce its size with distance. And let's now add a few elements to our drawing to give it a bit more interest. So what I will do is again, add a few of these tree trunks, for example. So we'll just focus on tree trunks. So I have one over here. I can add, one over here as well. And then we can add, a few in the distance just to give it interest. And actually, we will add the foliage as well, because for the further out distance, it's good to add the foliage, because the tree trunks, they are much smaller in size. So we can add some tree foliage to bring out a nice feel for them as well. So I'll have some trees over there, and then I can even add one over here, something like this. So this is how we quickly put down our composition. And now we will see how the path that goes across the planes really adds a nice element of interest in our drawing. So let me start by texturing the trunks first. So I've seen before, when you have a trunk, a very small trunk in your drawing, what you do is you simply add a level of this kind of jagged darkness to it. So that's what we will do for these trunks that are further out, something like this. And I will add that kind of jagged darkness to these far out trunks as well. And for this trunk, that's a bit bigger in size, I have, an option to add some kind of, bark texturing, right? So for the smaller size trunks, you don't really have an option of adding the texturing. But as the trunks, become bigger in size, you can add a bit of texture to indicate the feel of bark in the trunk. And the way we'll do it over here is to use these wiggly lines. We have seen this in other demonstrations, is that, this kind of wiggly lines, they kind of imitate a feel of bark. So that's what I will use for this trunk over here. And I'll start by adding this kind of wiggly lines to my trunk over here. So there we have it, right? So a quick layer of wiggly lines, and then what we do is we again darken one end more. So again, we have seen that you need to have one end darkened than the other to bring out the roundness. So we did that by just darkening one end of the trunk when they are smaller in size by using the jagged darkness. And for this trunk, what I will do is again add a bit more of wiggly lines. So you just add more of those lines in one end to bring out its darkness. And then finally I can go ahead and add a bit of jaggedness to the edge as well, right? So even over here, you can add a bit of this kind of jaggedness. So this kind of jaggedness, it makes the trunks, give a bit more rugged feeling, right? And that makes them more believable. So I'll even add a bit over here for this far out trunk, and then I did the same for this trunk that is a bit bigger in size. So there you can see, by adding these wiggly lines and making one end darker and adding a bit of jaggedness to the edges, we now have a nice feel for tree trunk and kind of bark texture for this trunk. And I will go ahead and actually do the same for this trunk as well over here. So there, again, I'm just adding those wiggly lines a bit here and there, and then finally I'm also kind of drawing the outline and making it a bit jagged over here. So again, what happens is that as you add the wiggly lines, a little bit of white is left in between, and this kind of random distribution of white gives a nice feel for the kind of bit of roughness of bark texture. So that's why when you use these lines, and in other demonstrations we have seen that you can use these kind of angular crossing lines as well. So when you use these, there's a kind of a bit of white left in between this dark area, and that gives a nice feel for kind of bark texture. And by adding a bit of roughness to the edges, you make it a bit more believable. So this is how we can easily do these smaller trunks. And for this trunk, I will again simply add a kind of jagged darkness over here. So again, when the trunks they become smaller in size, we simply add the jagged darkness to bring out their feel, and the jaggedness helps to kind of give a bit of kind of feel for roughness or the bark feel for the trunk as well. And I will add the same as well over here. So for the smaller trunks that are much smaller in size, it's much easier. It's very simple, to do their texturing by adding this kind of jagged darkness. And for this trunk, I think I will actually use the same jagged darkness as well. So now for this size, you can add, this, you can use this kind of wiggly lines if you want, but I'll just go ahead and add a bit of jaggedness just to do it texturing quickly. And then I again, for the edges, I add a bit of kind of roughness using, this kind of darkness. So there we have it, right? So we quickly put down our trunks. And now what we can do is we can actually highlight our plane lines, and then we will also highlight our path that is leading across the planes. That is the main focus of this demonstration. So I can start by now kind of highlighting my path, the plane lines. And as you can see now, it makes now it's clear why we should always have the initial lines a bit dotted, because we have this trunk going across the plane lines, right? So if you have a dark plane lines in the beginning, then these lines will be visible inside the trunk, and that should not be the case. So now I can darken this over here, something like this. And for this plane, again, we do something like this. And then finally, we have the furthest out plane like this. So again, you can see by simply deciding the order of these lines, we establish the order of the planes. So essentially, this closest plane will have the line like this, to which, which is not stopping at any other line. So for example, if I draw another plane, something like this over here, then this plane will be closest because this line stops here. But essentially in the closest plane to the viewer, we establish, this line that doesn't intersect any other line. And the planes that are further out, their lines, they stop at this line of the closest plane. And that is how we establish the order of the planes. And then let me darken this one as well a bit. And there we have it, right? So this is how you can establish the order of the plane. So start by drawing the closest plane, and then the plane that is starting from that, like this, and then the plane that is starting from the further out plane. So this plane starting from this is hidden behind this and this plane. So my line stops here and here. So now using this manner, you can easily establish their order. And once we have that, what we'll now do is to essentially define this path that is leading across the plane. And I will just darken it a bit like this. I don't want to use a solid line like this, but a little bit of broken line like this. It works well for the path. So I will have a path like this, and then you can see that it's tapering. So always have your path taper with distance, because that is how that's the rule of perspective, is that, and as it goes out in the distance, it reduces in size. And then I taper it further over here, and then finally I have a small path right into the distance. So there we have it. This path is going across the plane, and as you can see, when you look at this drawing, the first instinct your eyes have is to travel this path, and that is exactly what we want, right? So that establishes a nice kind of interest in our drawing right away. And you don't have to draw them in a line, right? So this path is a bit kind of shifted, and that is perfectly fine because in the path when it goes down the plane it might have shifted. So always you can shift the paths, the same path that as it goes across a different plane, you can shift it a bit to add more interest to it. So this is how we did over here. So this is how simply you can have a path that goes across the planes, and that really brings out a nice visual interest in your composition. And what we can do is to finish this plane as we have done before, right? So we can simply add a bit of foliage to these distant trunks by using these parallel lines that we have seen. So again, what you do is to essentially, simply define the outline if you want in the dotted line like this, and then start by adding a parallel lines. And then what you do is, kind of overlap them to add a bit of, dark and light spot. So again, you have one layer of parallel line like this, and then if you add one more layer on top, then you kind of, get this dark spot that kind of gets a nice feel for the volume of the foliage. And what you can do is to also kind of define the order of these two trunks over here. So they're almost in the same line. So let me draw this trunk down a bit. So this makes this trunk closest to us. So this foliage will be in front. So let's start by doing the foliage for this trunk, because this will essentially hide the foliage of the other tree behind it like this. So again, what I'm doing is simply using these parallel lines and having a few of them on top of each other to kind of bring out the darker and the lighter spots. So there we have it. So this is how simply this is a great way to do a quick sketch or just have a quick foliage of any kind of far out tree. You start by drawing the shape of the foliage and add one layer of parallel lines that gives an initial kind of texture, and then add a bit more here, a bit more there. And always remember to use this shape like this, use a shape like this to add a darkness like this. You do not add it in a vertical manner like this, so kind of just have a shape like this for adding successive layers of parallel lines, something like this, a shape like this. And this is how you can quickly give a feel for foliage for a tree. And I will add a bit more of those same lines over here. And as you can see, it's always good to draw the foliage that is in front, because a bit of foliage of the other trees hidden behind. So there we have it, right? So that's how quickly we can easily add a foliage for the far out trees using these parallel lines. And I will do the same for these three trunks as well. So just quickly I draw the outline, and this is further out. So actually we need to draw the foliage for this tree first. So let me draw it like this. So I start by doing the foliage of the tree that is closer to us, because its foliage will hide the foliage that will be on the tree that is behind it. So again, one layer of parallel line, and then I'm using a bit more parallel lines to kind of add a bit of darkness. Again, using the same kind of shape like this, little bit of flowing rounded shape like this. So this kind of gives an impression of different layers of foliage in there. And there we have it, right, like this. And then I will go ahead and do the foliage of this tree, and the bit of this foliage over here will be hidden. So if you want, you can even leave a little bit of white between the two, so that kind of sets the demarcation between the two foliage, right? So you don't want the two foliage to be completely kind of merged into each other. So you can always leave a bit of white. So I've explained in other tutorials that if you have different elements in your drawing that overlap, you can leave a layer of white, and that serves to differentiate the different layers or different elements, because you don't really have the option of using color to differentiate between the two elements. So leaving a bit of white like this in between helps to differentiate them, and our eyes, they can actually make out the fact that that the relative order of those two foliages. So there we have it. So quickly we use these parallel lines like this to establish the foliage for the trees, and I'll use the same. And again, just having a quick outline helps me understand how my foliage will. And again, what I'm doing is to use some kind of nice organic shapes to the foliage again. So this is a nice shape for a foliage, but don't make it a very similar, kind of geometric oval like this, right? So this is not good, but something like this is good, right? Something like this is good. So these kind of shapes, like the shape that I've used, they are kind of nice generic shapes that you can use for the foliage. And if you don't like the shape that that you see, you can always evolve by just adding a bit more parallel lines, right? So something like this, you can add a bit more line here, a bit more line there, and change its shape and just play around with it. So that's the fun of this pen and in drawing, is that we are not laying down our drawing in pencil and then just coloring it or just inking it. What we're doing is simply kind of evolving our drawing and enjoying the process, in the creative process of just kind of experimenting with it and adding a few things here, a few things there. So there we have it. So quickly I'm able to just kind of add a bit of parallel lines, add a bit more in here, in there. So if you feel that it's a bit too white, you can add a bit more dark like this. But always, the main thing to always add the parallel lines in this manner, like this kind of flowing manner. Do not make it vertical. Do not have any rigid shape like this. Just it's kind of a bit of flowing like this, so start here, like this is the kind of shape that we want, so add same over here, because what this is doing is this is to give a feel of successive layers of foliage. So this is how now you can feel that there are different layers. There's a little bit of depth because there's dark and light, but by adding it in this shape, you give a bit more feel for that layers like this. So that's what you have to do, and some of this will come with the practice. And as you practice adding these successive layers using parallel lines, you'll start to get a feel for how to give it appropriate volume. So there we have it. And then if you want, we can add a bit of we can add a bit of foliage over here for these two trunks as well, but I will just leave it for now for this tutorial, right? So my main purpose was to show how you can easily draw a path that is leading across planes. And what we will do next is to essentially draw a bit of the distant foliage. So again, I've explained that I always like to have something in the distance where our eyes can rest in my composition, in my drawings. And the most easy thing that you can do is to use a distant tree line, something like this, that we've seen in other demonstrations, or you can even use a kind of distant foliage, something like this. So I will simply use a distant tree line over here. So what I do is I start by adding a bit of this parallel lines over here, like this, and then again I taper them at the end just to add interest. So there we have it, right? This is how easily you can add a bit of distant foliage in your drawing. And then I can darken the bottom a bit. And again, the other thing to notice is that my shape is also a bit organic, so when I'm adding distant foliage, I'm doing something like this, so that shapes add a bit of nice organic feel to our drawing. And one other thing that we can use very effectively for a nice distant thing that our eyes can rest at is pine trees, distant pine trees. So to draw a distant pine tree, essentially what you do is you draw a line like this, and then you simply add this kind of simple lines like this in this shape. So there you have it, something like this. So essentially what you're doing is you're using very simple lines like this. And in other demonstration, I will cover this in detail, but essentially what you do is you draw a line, and then you simply add these small needle strokes. This is the same stroke that we use for very small grass. So those same strokes, this stroke is used, this stroke is used for very small grass and also for drawing a distant pine tree as well. So that's what we will do essentially over here. I draw my initial line, thin line, because this line, central trunk, will be hidden behind the needles, and then I simply add those needles in a kind of taper, like kind of the shape of a typical pine tree. And what you also do is to try to make the center a bit darker than the edges. So essentially in a pine tree, the center near the trunk is a bit darker because that's where you have the most density of needles, and then they usually kind of taper out towards the edges. So there we have it. So this is how and again, don't have it very flat bottom, but add a bit of dots if you want, just to kind of give it a feel of randomness. And at the edges you can add that dot as well. So there we have it. This is how easily you can just simply add a pine tree in the distance as well. And if you want, just extend a bit at the top just to give it a nice feel. So there we have it, a nice pine tree. You can draw this way, and then you can draw other different ones as well. So if you're drawing a bunch of them, then just simply stop it over here. So you'll have one pine tree in front whose foliage will be visible, this shape, and the other pine tree essentially will just be kind of hidden behind it. So there we have it. So there, now this gives an indication of two pine trees, where this one is in the front and this one is behind. So this is how easily you can simply add pine trees in the distance as well. And I'll add one more over here as well, right? So just to give it a nice feel, I can add one more pine tree over here as well. So there we have it, right? So same, you draw a line like this, and then you add the needles using this small grass stroke, or in this case, it becomes a needle stroke, and have the typical shape of the pine tree, and then make the center a bit darker. So here, my center is a bit darker than the edges, and that gives it a nice feel of volume as well. So there we have it. This is how simply you can actually just draw pine trees as your backdrop as well. And if we want, we can add one more over here. So here what we will do is we'll just simply kind of come to the edge and leave it over there like this. So this shows that this pine tree is kind of hidden behind our other foreground trees like this. And at the end, if you have a bit more white spot, you can always add a bit of distant foliage using these lines again at the very base of the pine tree, far out distance. So I'll just use these kind of lines like this. So this will define a kind of some foliage that is further out in the distance. This is the ultimate resting point for the viewer's eyes, right? So there we have it, just by using this kind of parallel, this angular lines. We have seen in other demonstrations, they act as a kind of, they give some indication of foliage in the far out distance. But because we don't really have any texture of foliage, either as a loop or as scribble that we have seen in other demonstrations, these parallel lines, they just indicate that there's something far out in the distance, which is why we use it as a distant foliage. But but we don't use these strokes for the close-up. So same for the trunk, for the tree foliage, when we use these kind of lines, these are used on trees that are a bit out in the distance. So here you can see that these lines, they give a nice indication of fact that it's a foliage, and there is some kind of volume indication as well, using this kind of different tones. But yeah, we don't really get a feel for exact, we don't see the leaf as such, right? So when the trees they get closer, then you need to use this kind of scribble stroke to draw a foliage to give it a bit more feel that we have seen in other demonstrations. So there we have it, right? So we simply drew different planes. We have a path that is going across the plane, and then we drew a kind of a bit of trees in the different planes to give it a nice interest. And now what we will do is also give a bit more definition to our path as well. So here I feel that this path is kind of a bit not defined, so as such it doesn't have focus. And the simplest way to kind of give a nice focus to the path is to use these parallel lines halfway across the path, and reduce these lines with distance as well, again, so they're just kind of halfway across. So as your size of the trunk of the path is reducing, the size of this, so essentially these lines, they're across, just halfway across the path. And what happens is that they give a nice feel to the path. So now we can actually feel that our path is going across, and what is happening is that these lines are kind of serving to highlight that path like this. So this is a nice way that you can you can highlight your path, and now you can see that path is going across the plane, is giving a nice element of visual interest to your drawing. And what we'll do finally is to add a bit of grass, the ground cover, to the different planes to kind of give it a bit more polished feel to the drawing. And we have seen in other demonstrations that to define the ground plane or the ground form, you use these lines to essentially establish the ground form of these different planes. So for example, for this plane I can use this kind of line like this. So what happens is that, as you can see, the moment you put down these lines, now there's a more concrete definition of the plane. So just a white spot. So for example, this plane is all white, and we have some sense of kind of how this plane is. But the moment I kind of put down my lines like this, it adds more solidity to the plane. In a sense, now we have a better understanding of the plane, the orientation and the form of that plane. So that's why we add these lines, just to kind of give a definition to the form of the plane. And then what we do in the end is to add a bit of ground cover to them as well. So for this closest plane, I will use these lines like this. If you want, if you're comfortable, you can use the one big lines like I'm doing to kind of cross your plane, or if you want, you can also have multiple set of such lines as well to define the form for your plane. And then I will do one more for this plane over here as well. And finally, what we do is to have a kind of ground cover for the plane. So right now it looks fine, but again, in absence of any ground cover, I don't find that the drawing having a polished feel. And to add the ground cover, we use these kind of small grass strokes. So this is a generic, all-purpose grass stroke that we have seen in a lot of my demonstrations, and this gives a nice feel of the ground is grass covered and gives it a more polished feel. So that's what we will do, and we just simply add a bit of the grass here, a bit of it there. And what we also do is to change, vary the size of the stroke. As we get closer to the viewer, we use a bit of bigger size. So we have, as we have seen in other demonstrations, essentially anything that is further out is smaller, and it becomes, bigger as it gets closer to the viewer. So the same goes for this grass stroke. So for the furthest out, we'll use a very small, stroke like this. The same stroke that we use for the needle, by the way, right? So this is the same kind of, so a little bit of line like this, and see, this is a bit angled. So this is not parallel lines, but this is a bit angled lines like this, and on this side they angle towards the right, on this side they angle towards the left, so something like this. So this is the kind of stroke that we use. And for the furthest out plane, here I will use a very small variation of this. I'll almost like a dot. If you want, you can even just use just a small dot to indicate there's some kind of ground cover over there. And so that's what I do over here like this. And the other thing that we also need to do is to ground our tree trunks. And the way we do it is to add a bit of darkness at their point of grounding. So in other demonstrations, what we have done is simply add a bit of dotted over darkness to the base of the trunk, which serves to ground the trunk. So that's what I'm doing over here. Is that as you can see, just adding a bit of dots. So this is a bit too small for me to kind of use a proper line. So I just add a bit of dot over here like this. and that serves to give a nice indication of ground cover. So again, this is the suggestion that we use in pen and ink, is to simply have some kind of tone, a texture to indicate something. And over here we can simply use a small grass or even a dot to give a hint of some kind of ground cover. And to ground the trunks, we just add a bit of darkness at their base like this, even using a dot over here. So that now gives a nice indication of the trunks is grounded and some kind of ground cover for that plane. And over here, let me just add a bit more like this. And I always like to kind of make the spot where the trunk and the foliage meet a bit darker, because that's how that area receives a bit of less sunlight. So making this a bit darker establishes a nice volume for the foliage. There we have it. And so for this plane, I also use the same grass stroke over here, but you can see that I've used a bit of bigger grass stroke compared to this distant plane over here, because this is a bit closer to the viewer. So what I'm doing is using a bit bigger grass stroke to establish that kind of distance in our drawing. And over here, this is the plane, this is furthest out, so I'm using a very small, again, almost like those dots that I used for that, for this side. So I'll use same very small dots, almost kind of grass stroke, to kind of provide some kind of foliage or the ground cover for this plane. So there we have it. So again, you can see that there is some dots, there's some darkness, so your eyes can now make out that there's some kind of ground cover, right? So it doesn't look kind of barren or empty like this plane or this plane looks, for example. So this just adds a bit of nice visual interest to the drawing. And the other thing I've done is also leaving a bit of this spot over here, right? So having this kind of white areas in the distance also lets your eyes wander as to travel, and your mind wander as to what lies further out in the distance. And for this trunk, for this plane, I will use the same grass stroke, but I will use again a bit bigger over here, so something like this. So now I will use something like this size over here, something like this, to again do the ground cover. And to ground the trunks, we'll use the same technique, so I'll use a bit more density of that stroke to create a bit of darkness. So again, you can see that just by having a bit of darkness over here in the base, it gives a much nicer feel for the trunk is grounded compared to this trunk. So this trunk is not grounded. So again, just add a bit of darkness using this small grass stroke, and there you have it. Now this trunk also acquires a feel for, as being grounded. And as you can see, that makes a big difference in giving it a much more polished feel. And I will go ahead and, add a bit more grass over here as well, a kind of ground cover. So I've covered, doing the ground cover extensively in a lot of my demonstrations. They are part of all of my drawing, because in the end, I like to have a polished feels. And essentially, they're very easy to do and really adds a nice character to your drawing once you incorporate them. So there we have it, right? So this plane is done as well. And then again, in your drawing, you can add a bit of foliage for these two trunks as well, but I'll leave it as is for this demonstration. And I will go ahead and add a bit more of the grass stroke for this trunk as well. And then ground this trunk just using the same kind of bit of darkness at its base that we did for other trunks. So there we have it, right? Just by adding a bit of darkness over there, this trunk appears grounded as well. And finally, for the the plane that is closest to us, I will use a bit bigger grass strokes, something like this. Like this. So now you can see that the change in the size of the grass is also reinforcing the notion of distance, right? So I will use a bit bigger stroke for the grass for the closest plane, and for the furthest out, I give a very faint indication, so that reinforces the notion of distance in our drawing. So quickly, again, bit here, bit there, just give a suggestion, and keep your hand moving, and then you draw them in clump like this, right? So this is the kind of clump that you draw them in a little bit. On the side that is oriented towards left, this is towards right, and then so this is the kind of clump of grass that you draw quickly here. So at one side, other side, and there we have it. So this again, comes with practice. As you practice more, you'll be able to give it a quick random feel, and that helps to give a quick indication of the plane as grass cover. So again, in my demonstration, I'm attempting to show how you can actually do quick landscapes and do them in under 30 minutes or whatever time you have. But if you're drawing something more polished, then you might want to actually draw this grass a bit more in a polished manner. And by that I mean you might want to kind of create a nice density of grass. But for these quick drawings, yeah, you can just simply use this grass stroke bit here, bit there, and have a nice feel for the ground as grass cover. So there, and then I'll add a bit more over here as well. So this is how you can have a quick drawings which still have a nice polished feel, right? So my aim is to essentially show how you can do a quick drawing that, that are not kind of, just very simple. They're simple, but they're pleasing in a sense, right? So we are drawing different elements. We have trees and we have paths going across the plane. So they are simple and they can be quickly done, but at the same time they have a nice, still a polished, nice feel to them. So there we have it, right? So I added the grass to this plane, and all the planes, they now look nicely covered with some kind of ground cover. And you can also kind of highlight the plane just to kind of bring them out a bit more over here, something like this. And what we will do finally in the end is to simply kind of add some kind of cover to the path as well, right? So our path looks kind of a bit barren, so you can again add a bit of grass over here, or you can also add a bit of wildflower, something like this. Draw a stem, a flower like this, or something, this kind of wildflowers you can add a bit over here as well. And always remember to ground them by using this wiggly line. So I draw a small flower and then I ground it using a wiggly line, something like this. This is a very quickly effective way of giving a nice feel to your path as well, as some kind of wildflowers. And in the path, in the distance, you need to draw the smaller flowers like this over here, right? Or you can just add in a bit of, so a tall grass can be indicated using this kind of line, just a line and a kind of seed pod at the top, and this gives a bit of kind of wild grass that is growing on the path. And then you can always use a bit of small grass strokes just to give it some kind of ground cover as well. So there we have it, right? And you can also darken the edges of the path a bit more if you want something like this to bring them out furthermore. So there we have it, right? So add a bit more flower, or a bit of grass. So this is something that you can again play with, and this is actually, to me, the real fun of doing a simple landscape, is that you can add your own feel. So if you're in the mood, add more flowers, for example, right? Or if you want, just have the path as a bit of grass covered, or something like this. Now I will leave this white over here for the distant path, because if I add something, it might kind of merge into the kind of the bit of darker spot we have over here. So it's always good to have that contrast. So I'll just leave this distant path white, so that now our eyes can easily follow the path along different planes. So there we have it. This is how you can easily draw these different planes, and then have a path that goes across the multiple planes, and which adds a nice visual interest. And when the viewer looks at this drawing, their eyes will be traveling the path across the plane, and then they will enjoy doing that. And then there are also other elements that we have drawn over here, where the viewers, their eyes can rest as they follow the path. So this is how you can quickly draw a simple landscape in under 30 minutes, and yeah, enjoy doing it anytime. Thanks. Take care. Bye bye.